Let's talk about the reality of the situation when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2, because I've seen a ton of things when it comes to people talking about this system, what they feel is right, what they feel is wrong, and I wanted to go over my own opinion on a lot of these things. So if this video is a little bit long-winded, I'm sorry. I'll do my best to have timestamps so you can go to where you want to go to, but I do suggest listening to the whole thing overall. Now, let's talk about the situation with the Nintendo Switch 2 as we are on the eve of pretty much the launch. This is the last week before it's about to drop, or it's right before it's about to drop, depending on when you're watching this. But yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting for a lot of the fans out there. It's exciting for people that have been waiting for years to be able to get some stronger hardware, some new games, different things to play when it comes to Nintendo. Like the Nintendo Switch 1 is ancient at this point. The Nintendo Switch 2 comes in with a much stronger premise right off the back, reinforcing what we loved about the Nintendo Switch 1 and giving us a bunch of new things to kind of stew about and discuss and talk. So it's just exciting as a fan of the platform when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 1. But the premise of it, basically what they're doing, or what at least what I think that they're trying to do overall, is take all the strengths that we saw with the Nintendo Switch 1 and make sure that they continue with that. The hybrid form factor, the playing together, obviously tabletop mode, Joy-Cons, all that different stuff that they pioneered or they put together with the Nintendo Switch 1 that make that even significantly better. And then on top of that, adding in a bunch of the features that people wanted beforehand. So stuff like voice chat, for example. That was something that was highly requested. People really disliked that it was tied to a phone app. You don't have that anymore. You can just have built-in voice chat overall. Having a stronger platform for your games when it comes to 60 frames per second for games. I don't think we've seen anything that's not running at 60 frames per second from Nintendo's first-party studios overall. Having some better, stronger third-party support out of the gate. These are all things that were criticisms of the Nintendo Switch 1, and it looks like they've been addressed for the Nintendo Switch 2. But there's some asterisks or caveats, right? There's some valid criticism when it comes to the third-party game key card situation. I understand that, people wanting to have the full game on the cartridge. I am with you right there. People talking about Mario Kart World being $80 outside of the bundle. Completely understand that. Nobody likes to see the prices go up for the games. They're already expensive. Everything is getting more expensive. So definitely don't like to see that. There's valid criticisms when it comes to that. And I 100% agree with those valid criticisms from people who actually care. But with every single valid criticism and stuff like that, guys, there are people that are completely bad actors in this whole thing. And that's why I want to put in the whole reality of the situation. There are people who don't care about the Nintendo Switch 1, who didn't help the Switch 1 be a success, who didn't actually buy the games, who told you to steal everything or pirate everything, which, whatever, that's their opinion. I don't really care. But what I'm trying to say is that there are a number of people that are literally just trying to grift off or trying to clout chase off of this, even though that they don't care, they don't play the games, they never supported it, but they've got something to say in order to get people to pay attention to their channel or to pay attention to their Twitter, or maybe just because they're a bit miserable and they don't like the fact that their system isn't in the spotlight. I'm not really sure overall, but that is a real thing. Just like there's people that are on the complete other side that are saying, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever and everybody should like it. And it's like, no, people are allowed to have their opinions on stuff, but we can clearly see the people who are simply just trying to take advantage of the situation because they never really supported Switch 1. They thought everything was overpriced on there. They thought everything was terrible on that system. It doesn't matter at the end of the day what Nintendo does. They're going to be upset with the hardware. They're going to be upset with something. So those people, we know who those people are. I can disregard most, if not everything that they say, because they're not worried about getting everything right the first time. They are emotionally attached to it. They are emotionally trying to rage bait people or emotionally trying to get people to feel a certain way, to be angry about stuff. And that's what the general basis of their content is to get people to be angry about things. So for me, at least, I definitely look at it like I do have some, I would say, context, or I do have some nuance to when I listen to what some people are saying compared to others. There are valid people that support, that have been there, that know what they're talking about. But then there are people that are misinformation merchants and like to just sit there and say whatever they want. And then if they get it right or they get it wrong, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. All that matters is how they feel like talking about it at that time, you know? So getting information right to me is super important. Making sure that people have the right information and that people know exactly what's happening, not based off just how I feel, just not a personal opinion, but actually being right about the information. That's super important. And to me, cannot be understated how important it is to actually get information right about products that come out. And if you're wrong on something, it's a simple, yo, my bad, I was wrong about it. Not some type of crazy standoff situation like we've seen with people online. It's one of those things to where the reality that I see is that there are some people that are just trying to take advantage of the situation. So it is what it is on that front. But if you're enjoying this content, we got more to talk about. But please, if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and click that notification bell. And let me know what your reality for the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be, if you're going to be picking up the system or not. But let's talk about a couple other things here and why it kind of moves over to the next thing. And that is Microsoft's position. And I talked about how I wanted to discuss this before, but the Nintendo Switch 2 was going to be greatly boosted when it comes to the press, when it comes to the games, when it comes to just how it does in the marketplace, because for the first time in a while, Microsoft is in its lowest position that we've ever seen overall with console sales. This is pretty much like 20 years or so in the making. Since the original Xbox, Microsoft has never done this bad. The original Xbox sold around 24 million or so, but since then they had two other systems that did pretty good, then okay-ish, overall. But with the Xbox 360, that sold over 80 million units. And then the Xbox One, it sold just under 60 million units. But the Xbox Series has sold almost half, or around half of that of the Xbox One. I think it's around 30 something million, low 30s. Microsoft doesn't update the numbers, so we're going off of just estimates from analysts out there, but that's not good. In today's day, in today's market, that is underneath, or that is around the N64, and that is underneath the Super Nintendo. These are underneath systems or around systems that were decades old, that did not have the marketing machine and the money and the type of, I would say, just status that Microsoft has. If you're a third-party developer, Microsoft has been somewhere to where you know that you can rely upon when it comes to big sales or third-party sales. But if you can't sell the system overall, then you can't really sell the game. And then on top of the system and the game and all that, what if your game is not on Game Pass? You have to contend with people that are content with just playing games off of Game Pass and not actually buying your big game, depending on what type of game that you have. So there's a lot of factors. Not saying that Game Pass is a complete drain on that, but it is a factor to consider. So third-party developers are absolutely looking for the thing to kind of slot into where, yes, people buy the premium games on the platform, and Nintendo Switch 2 is probably going to be that slotted in platform for these developers. Now, PC is still there, which we'll talk about in just a bit with PlayStation 5, but they need something to kind of come in and do well. And I think this is the big reason why Square Enix has already announced the Final Fantasy Remake Saga for the Nintendo Switch 2 and have not announced it yet for the Xbox. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's going to come to Xbox as well at some point, but the priority is just not there because they know the position that we saw with the Nintendo Switch 1 and how well that did. 150 million units plus and multiple millions of games being sold from third-party developers overall. So now with the Nintendo Switch 2, you've got a significantly stronger platform that can support your Final Fantasy, that can support your Borderlands, the new 007 game, Hitman, Split Fiction, Street Fighter. All these games are now coming, which was a night and day difference from what we saw with the Nintendo Switch 1 at launch, where there was literally no major third-party titles, AAA games at the launch of the Nintendo Switch 1. It is a complete 180 from that point, and that's why I say third-party developers are keen on actually honing in on the Nintendo Switch 2 and having it be a secondary system in terms of what they prioritize when it comes to consoles. At least they're going to prioritize PS5, of course, PlayStation, but then right after that, it's going to be the Nintendo Switch 2, as that's going to be a platform where people are used to buying premium software overall. So they're going to have to kind of support it. Once again, the position of Microsoft is at its lowest point when it comes to console sales. Microsoft themselves are still making plenty of money off of Game Pass and off of the platform when it comes to PC and just selling their games on PlayStation and other places, and even Nintendo with like Minecraft, they're still doing fine. So they're not going to go out of business, or they're not going to not make another system. But at the same time, like, these third-party developers have shown very clearly that they're willing to, okay, we're going to actually support Nintendo this time around and see if this thing and help it become a major success with our games from the beginning. So I do see a lot more titles coming over this time around in the first year, 2 years or so than what we saw with the Nintendo Switch 1. Now let's talk about PlayStation 5 and PC and overall what's kind of happening there. PS5 and PC are doing great for third parties. That's still going to be one of the priorities, or the priority will be PlayStation 5 and PC for a lot of developers. Those two platforms are going to get the large majority of games, which is fine. You know, those are going to be platforms that developers are always going to be on. But I will say this, if you look at the PlayStation 5 overall and the sales numbers, the last quarter, I think they sold just under 3 million units, which was underneath the 4 million units they did year on year before in the same time period. So while PS5 is doing great, it's pacing right next to the PlayStation 4 or a bit underneath it. That's going to top out at what, 120 million, right underneath that or so. While that's really good, I definitely think that third-party developers want to see more consoles being sold so they can do better than that. So while that's great and that's awesome, PC's a little bit of a different market when it comes to certain things. Like, you can't judge it by install base or not. It's just there and it sells depending on the type of game and everything. But when it comes to the overall amount of users, third-party developers definitely want more than what we've seen so far with PlayStation 5 and PC in terms of buying the games. And once again, that's where the Nintendo Switch 2 kind of slots in, because they're used to Microsoft kind of having a bit more of a console presence. The Nintendo Switch 2 can help bridge that gap right now and at this point. And it does seem like there's going to be next-gen systems within the next 2 to 3 years or so. And don't get me wrong, the install bases are going to be good for PlayStation 5 and probably not so good for Microsoft. But the premise of starting over again after where we are right now at this point doesn't seem like it's going to be something that third-party developers are going to be super keen on when it comes to their games. So the PlayStation 5 is going to be supported for a long time because that install base is still going to be playing games. Just like for a while, even still up to this point, PS4 is still played quite a bit, and there still are some PS4 games that come out, although the support is waning. So really the reality is that the Nintendo Switch 2 is set up in a very good spot at this point in comparison with PlayStation, PC, and Xbox to be one of the pillars that third-party developers can support going forward in the future. And hopefully it makes everyone better in the sense to where the third-party developers, they get another platform to sell their games on. Us as consumers, we get more great games. And of course, the industry is lifted up because we have more games being made and more awesome titles coming out and more revenues coming in, more games are being made, more jobs are being provided for people. So that's the whole goal of it. It doesn't always work that way 100%, but that's the goal. That's what they're trying to do, at least. Now, let's talk about what the most important thing is, because I still get this every now and then when people talk about how the Nintendo Switch is going to do or how it could potentially do. And the most important thing is games. It's not just what you feel is the momentum or how it's going to do or who knows how it's going to do. It's the games. We also know from the beginning, at least at this point, the Nintendo Switch 2 is probably going to have an incredible sales launch overall. We've got pretty much records that are going to be broken or set up to be broken in Japan so far with the demand of the system. When it comes to here in the US, it's been pretty incredible to see all of the pre-orders, the amounts and allocation in stock, and see the different retailers burn through all of those and even have extra stock for people who didn't get a pre-order on launch day. So the beginning sales are going to be pretty good, probably record breaking for Nintendo at least, and maybe even industry wise. So I do feel that with that incredibly strong start, along with stuff that we're going to talk about as well, that's going to propel the Nintendo Switch 2 to really good sales overall. If the games are there and if they're continuing to come out, then that's how people are going to buy the system. When it comes to my own sales prediction, it's going to be tough for any system to hit what the Nintendo Switch 1 or the DS or the PlayStation 2 has done. Those are 150 million selling systems. There's only 3 of them in the history. So I don't think that the Nintendo Switch 2 needs to hit where the Nintendo Switch 1 hit in order to be considered a success or anything. People have talked about that. For Nintendo, it's going to be about profit. How profitable are they compared to what they're actually doing? They know that the more systems that they sell, the more potential software they can sell. So obviously that's intrinsically tied together. But at the end of the day, they want to be very profitable overall. And they've got two platforms right now in order to get that done. One in the short term with the Nintendo Switch 1 on its last legs. And then, of course, the long term would be the Nintendo Switch 2. But I still feel that the sales predictions are going to be right on point with what I think based off of Nintendo's first prediction. So yeah, I think they're going to do anywhere between 90 to like 120 million or so. I think it's going to be right around there in the next 6 to 7 years or so. And they could do better depending on what third-party games and what first-party games they get. But at the end of the day, it is going to be dependent on that. A lot of the noise that we hear in terms of some of the stuff that people have said or other things, that stuff is less important. What's more important is actually what content players get and how Nintendo markets that content. That's the most important thing, because believe it or not, people like to erase this or they like to revise the history, but people hated the Nintendo Switch 1 when it first launched.
This is the same hard-headed, tone-deaf, out-of-touch, woefully inadequate Nintendo we've become all too accustomed to. When it comes to their future prospects as a hardware manufacturer in particular, it can be argued that they've never ever looked worse, and that's really saying something. But they haven't learned anything. They haven't changed one iota, and they couldn't seem to care any less than they do right now. Could Nintendo Switch be great? Sure. Will it be? It's not looking too good for where I'm sitting. From my vantage point, it's looking like the Wii U all over again.
Like, people beforehand were making multiple videos saying that it's going to flop, it's going to fail. There were articles written all over the place how you shouldn't even buy it, that you can just get PlayStation 4 or get an Xbox One or just play PC. It was all over the place. Now, a lot of that stuff has been scrubbed, or a lot of those videos have been deleted, but that's how it was overall. I think that the hype and excitement in terms of how many people are jumping into the Switch 2 at the launch is definitely significantly greater than what we saw with the Nintendo Switch 1 because of the proven concept and because of the content that is coming. But people were saying the same thing, if not worse, when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 1. So I do feel at the end of the day, just like Switch 1, it's going to be based off of what games come out. It's going to be based off of how good is the next Zelda, how good is the next 3D Mario, how good is Smash Bros., how good is Animal Crossing, how good is Splatoon, how good are the games that are the dedicated system sellers that we've seen on the Nintendo Switch 1, how good are those games, and what is it going to do? Now, another thing that I will also want to put here, kind of like the last point, is that Nintendo has something that they've never done before. In the past, when people talk about Nintendo's sales, if it's going to be bad or good, they bring up the Wii U, they bring up GameCube, they bring up systems that had to compete with itself when it comes to Nintendo. Those are systems that had the Game Boy there, or the GBA, or the DS, where you're splitting games. This is the first time Nintendo's made a sequel to a platform, right? A follow-up, and everything's just funneling to that one system. Most of the development resources. We haven't had that before. Even with the Nintendo Switch 1 at the beginning, Nintendo is splitting the games with Switch 1, but it's a little bit different overall in terms of how you're doing it, because you can easily convert those games to Nintendo Switch 2 editions, like we're seeing with Metroid Prime 4. Before, it was a completely different platform and a completely different architecture, like with the 3DS and the Switch, or more like the 3DS and the Wii U. That's more of the in line with what we're talking about, to where you had to make completely different types of games, and that doesn't work anymore overall. So Nintendo combining their home console and portable, to me, is going to be a long-term move that guarantees a baseline number of sales of at least, minimum to me, at least 90 million or so. Because even at their worst, when it comes to two systems combined with the 3DS and the Wii U, that still did over 80 million units combined. So I feel that with a combined platform, with incredible games, with all the stuff that Nintendo has all releasing on one platform, I don't really feel anything underneath 90 million is going to happen. Probably going to be over that, considering how Microsoft is right now at this point, and what I explained with the position of Nintendo Switch 2 with third-party developers, in addition to Nintendo having all of their first-party games to truly drive the platform forward. So that's my analysis on this before we get the system. So what do you guys think when it comes to the reality of the situation with the Nintendo Switch 2? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 content right here on screen. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.